we've got a great discussion, a very important discussion. Obviously, if you were watching WBTV last night, there was a discussion about community benefit agreements came up on Jamie Bowles' segment. And in fact, they gave us a little plug for this episode. And so today's guest is a very new organization that has arrived on the scene. I mean, it's not new in the sense that all of the participants have been involved in Charlotte from the neighborhood, from the community standpoint for many, many years. And so what I would love to do is give an opportunity for the representatives for the Charlotte Community Benefits Coalition to introduce themselves to the audience and also explain a little bit about the Charlotte Benefits Coalition and its history. And then maybe we can do a little deeper dive into community benefit agreements. So I see the team is here, so maybe you can introduce yourselves and tell a little bit about the Charlotte Benefits Coalition.
Ishmael. So the visionary behind the CBC is really Ricky. So I'll Ricky, you should start out.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm Ricky Hall, and I'm a core member of the Community Benefits Coalition. And in short, community benefits agreements are agreements that are negotiated between developers and community groups, and they are legal instruments that are used to impact communities that have been marginalized around large-scale public use projects and address some of the systemic inequities that have been historically impacting communities, particularly in the Crescent of Charlotte Mecklenburg. And so community benefits are not new to the landscape. Community benefits are being used across the country in places like Atlanta, Nashville, in Asheville from a public benefits perspective, and are certainly not new to the Charlotte Mecklenburg landscape because they have been used by communities that are more affluent and more organized for years, and now communities that have been impacted by the growth and by historic legacies of marginalization are now asking for more equity and a fair share from the 2040 plan. And so we've come together as a coalition of communities and nonprofits and neighborhood organizations to respectfully demand that community benefits be a large part of the vision that's outlined in the 2040 plan, as well as the driving tool, which is the UDO, and that there be a seamless blend between the TOD, which is the transit-oriented development. All three have to be seamlessly intertwined in the community benefits in order for it to be a very useful tool in the Charlotte Mecklenburg landscape to achieve equity and social and economic mobility, which is a significant driver of this. So stop there.
So tell me a little bit more about this coalition, because it obviously it's a group of organizations. Tell me who's in this coalition.
Well, we have approximately 30 some odd organizations that are in the coalition currently, and we know that is established, set to grow because the strongest community benefits are only as strong as the coalitions that come together to actually make up the CBC. And so those are the membership that range from the Housing Justice Coalition to the West Boulevard Neighborhood Coalition, and we have other Cherry Community Organization, a number of organizations across the city from the west to the east are members of the coalition. And we certainly have also a number of nonprofits that are joined in. We have faith community representatives as well as other established organizations supporting the the CBC.
Okay, awesome.
And
Hey, go
I
ahead.
was also going to add that, you know, like hey, my name's Ishmael. My role being involved in the CBC is as a member of the Housing Justice Coalition, even though I live in the West Boulevard corridor. And for instance, like my neighborhood, Clinton Park, is also like a member of the CBC. There are like a lot of other neighborhoods that are represented, such as Howie Acres. And but I think Ricky covered everything else. But yeah, I mean, there's, you know, this is definitely like a sort of collective sort of effort to really mobilize, you know, the entire city for, you know, broadly, really, it's really social, economic, racial justice, and specifically in reference to land use, decision-making, transit-oriented development, and sort of direct investment into communities that have long not had that investment, or have historically been redlined or, you know, suffered the effects of segregation. So.
And I would also add that Ishmael is correct. There's an environmental justice aspect to this as well. And let me just preface that my participation in the CBC is not, while I live in the West Boulevard corridor, my purpose for being here today is to represent all of those organizations that are in the CBC, because all of us suffer from the same types of maladies that have been historically implanted upon us. And so all responses are relative to the overall whole of the CBC and not the sum of its parts.
So
And
I think
Rocky, let me add on this.
Yes, please, Dr.
And certainly people may say, well, you know, you're looking at Cherry and places like Greer Heights, but we got to understand that when we talk about Crescent and Wedge, which sometimes is the common language of the city, even when you have communities that are in the wedge, if you will, there may still be, and they may be undergoing a great deal of gentrification. There may still be pockets of disenfranchisement, right? And so it's important for us to be sure that we understand that when you're talking about equities and inequities, they run across zip codes, they run across geographies. And part of what we recognize fully with the CBC is that if we're talking about this term of equity, which tends to be the I'm not going to say necessarily say the flavor of the month, but you know how we tend to talk about certain things in Charlotte at different times, as other communities do as well and other cities do as well. But it's important for us to understand that equity is something that you do. It's not just something that you say. And so when we look at land use and development, we understand how that really does determine a lot of what happens in this city. And we're talking about Comp 2040, that's a land use and development. Even though it's the vision piece of it, the UDO is going to be the more the standard, if you will, or the statutes, if you will, and then place type mapping will be added to that. So it's important for us to, at the beginning, start talking about how do we thread equity throughout this whole discussion. And that's a part of what CBAs will allow us to do. So it's just important for us to understand we're trying to connect equity and CBAs, and it's a way to help to achieve equity across the globe, or across in terms of the Charlotte globe, if you will, for everybody, all communities.
Yeah, I heard one thing that Ricky had said about the various members of the coalition. That he said there was almost like a common suffering or something, that there is history here. And I think that maybe some folks think that while the Charlotte Community Benefits Coalition is sort of new to the scene in the sense that it has been organized here, it sounds like there has already been set into play for quite some time the ingredients that created a Charlotte Community Benefits Coalition. I'm not necessarily asking for a full-blown history, but perhaps maybe for the audience, it would help to kind of set that the 2040 plan, you know, and we've had a lot of discussion about this in our media, is a land use document, but land use comes from a context of, you know, what has happened before. And I think that it might help those who are either new to Charlotte or just need a refresher about what was the land use kind of landscape for communities like in East and West Charlotte prior to all of this discussion about equity, as you mentioned, as sort of a new term or a newer term, and the 2040 plan. I think that helps kind of set the stage like maybe even the experience of the Cherry neighborhood prior to, you know, all of this. I think that helps kind of, again, give some context to our discussion.
Well, let me just take a shot at that and preface this by saying that CBAs arose out of a process whereby current land use planning and zoning decisions were made in a way in which communities could not participate. And so when you look at the 2040 plan, there is a realization that you take the Charlotte Mecklenburg landscape, and let's just start with the Chetty study, that showed that Charlotte was 50 out of 50 in terms of large cities with social and economic mobility. And then when you look at that from a historical landscape, and we look at the issues of redlining and or urban renewal, steering, and all of those types of inequities, growth has not been equitable in the Charlotte Mecklenburg landscape. And so what we had was a public-private form of land use and zoning decisions that were made particularly between the developer-builder community and elected officials. And communities, particularly the communities that we represent, were always on the tail end of that. And by the time in which you got involved, the decision and the die had already been cast. And so those decisions were going to move forward. And so we just look at that landscape, whether it be in terms of infrastructure improvements, all of the highways that have led to division and gentrification of our communities. I mean, poor performing schools. We have a lot of inequity in terms of home ownership versus rental. There are any number of maladies, lack of access to healthcare, grocery stores. You can just run down the list of things. And these are decisions that are not made simply because people are perceived as being, low or moderate income. These are direct decisions that result from land use zoning and decisions made at our local government level.
Right, and I think to that point as well. I mean, there's there are a lot of specific examples that we can point to, and I'll raise those. But I also, like Ricky and Dr. Sylvia have said, it's this is really part and parcel of a long history of decisions that have been made, decisions that have disproportionately affected African-American neighborhoods and African-American residents in the city, right? And so, we're talking about, obviously, the technical aspects of it are in zoning and in land use, but when it really comes down to it, right, these were decisions that were intended to kind of maintain segregation and maintain a particular kind of way or order within Charlotte that has been documented to have, disproportionately impacted largely, Black people in Black neighborhoods, right? I mean, there's the 2015 study, Charlotte being the worst for upward economic mobility. So, well, we can't, and we don't shy away from talking about the broader kind of like historical patterns that have really been driven by public policy. And so there are 4 examples that I would mention, and I won't get too much into them, but right, I mean, there have been, there's sort of like the West Boulevard playbook, right, in the way in which like this playbook was designed, and largely it was kind of like a development plan, and Ricky can speak to it. And at the end of the day, right, like there was no commitment to upholding that plan. There was the actual creation of Ballantyne, right, which was done with public dollars, which this was an opportunity whereby the city could have built affordable housing, or could have, built Ballantyne in a way as to where it wouldn't concentrate, wealth and affluence. That was a decision that was made. I mean, there are numerous examples that Dr. Sylvia can tell you about in Cherry, whereby developers have built, have effectively violated the law, and the city has refused to hold them accountable. And then Cherry the CCO has to file a lawsuit. And then I would say the most recent and glaring example really is the development of the light rail, the Blue Line itself, and the transit-oriented development around the Blue Line, and the kinds of development that we see around that. I mean, that process was publicly subsidized, And, you know, there could have been land set aside for affordable housing and many other things. And we see that by and large, it's just been like luxury, you know, apartments and other forms of development. So these are like very, these are like very specific, intentional decisions that are being made to sort of develop the city in a particular way. And because the past inequities have never really been addressed, right? It's just, we just get like a snowball that really reinforces poverty and segregation. And so, I mean, really, this is like the first step, you know, for us as communities, kind of saying, you know, it's not going to happen anymore, right? We can't continue to do the same thing.
Exactly.
So
let me also say too that when you think about, and I think part of what you were asking as well was about just the history of, my apologies, there's a gardener outside, the history of zoning and rezoning and development and how, why this is so important. Because, you know, in this city, as in maybe so many other cities, we understand that zoning plays a major role in how communities exist, how communities continue to exist. Land use and development, that's a hot topic, but it's also one of those things that a lot of people in communities know nothing about. They don't necessarily understand it until the yellow sign with the big Z shows up. And then they're wondering, what exactly is this? And by that time, what we recognize from a community's perspective is really the deal is almost done. They may very well have some public input session, but developers have already met with planning staff an inordinate amount of hours before that yellow sign ever shows up. And what we sometimes say is, you know, it's important for us to understand it because a vacant lot today may very well be a Walmart tomorrow. And that's how zoning works. That's how quickly it works. And this is a part of that process. Now they're saying, after so many years, we want to look at our zoning policy, our zoning classifications, and we want to do something different. So if people are used to hearing R6 single family or R22 multifamily or PED overlay, those kinds of things, you're going to hear some different things now. And they may think it's alphabet soup, but it really is so important to your community and helps to determine what's going to show up on the lot next to you, what's going to show up across the street from you, where schools are going to be built, and so forth and so on. When as a community, we lost the formal protest petition option because the legislators voted it out, that was when communities really started to lose some of their power. With formal protest petitions, communities were able to say, we're going to force a supermajority vote. And it forced developers to come to the table with communities and to negotiate before it went before city council. And we lost that. And now it's just a simple majority vote. And if it's a conventional kind of rezoning, developers don't have to come to communities for that. If it's conditional rezoning, yes, they are required to have a community meeting, but that doesn't necessarily mean the community will benefit from that meeting. So this is something where we're saying, how do we make sure that communities that may not be as privileged have an opportunity to engage with developers? And I say engage because engagement is a process for community benefits agreements. Community engagement is not community benefits agreements. You have to organize, you have to engage. And there are some segments in the city, they do this very well. Developers know to go directly to them. But in other areas, in other geographies, those communities don't have the same opportunity. So we're trying to level the playing field, and we're trying to make sure that we can actually infuse equity into the process. That's part of what we're doing. And that kind of gives you that historical context of why we're doing this with CBAs. They're critical.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that, you know, if you've never done this in Charlotte, you should really do it. It's called the, I guess it's like the Charlotte in Black and White bus tour. It's a history of sort of land use decisions in Charlotte. I think it's done by Community Building Initiatives. And one thing that's striking is that land use decisions displace so many people, particularly communities of color in Charlotte, just in the last 50 years, right? I mean, you know, 60 years. And it's something that sometimes there's that old saying, it's like old wine in new bottles, you know? And I think that from what I can see here is that it sounds like the Charlotte Community Benefits Coalition, I mean, again, it's not just the three of you. There are numerous organizations who I think do not want to see this old wine in a new bottle, right? Another another maybe kinder, gentler version of urban renewal, right? Where urban renewal, they came in, they just swang the wrecking ball, and people were just running out like, you know, the Middle East or something. It was just crazy, right? And now it's maybe it's coached in language that may be a little more palatable to the average person. It may very well be, you know, it may very well, you know, just have a lot of alphabet soup, as you might have, as you've kind of alluded to. So yeah, and speaking of the alphabet soup, you know, so like yesterday on WBTV, I was asked questions about community benefit agreements by Jamie Bowl, and that's a lot of talk, right? Because it sounds like the community benefit agreement is something that could help create a more equitable version of development in our city, and so maybe this would be a great opportunity because to talk about the CBA, because in last night's episode with Jamie Bowl, they had Councilman Bokhari. And Councilman Bokhari, I don't know, maybe he had his own studio or something. They had him in a video, and he's saying there's something very terrible called a CBA, and it's a bad thing, and you know, it's in the community, in the comprehensive plan, and obviously, you know, it's him and I think Councilman Driggs. I don't think it's pretty apparent what their particular view is on community benefit agreements, and one could argue on developing Charlotte in a more equitable fashion. I think that you kind of you know, that has kind of been played out there, and so Ishmael, if you would prefer, would you like me to bring up the slides to help maybe we can explain CBAs to people, because I think it's in the news, community benefit agreements, but if you got one side saying they're just bad, just don't even talk about it. We don't even want to talk about it, what it is, just scrub it from the entire 2040 plan. It might help to kind of educate folks about what actually a CBA is. So would this be a good time, Ismail, to pull it up?
Right. Did you want me to pull it up?
I mean,
Also,
yeah. Do you have the? I mean, I have it on slide 12. Do you want me to go there, or it's up to you?
Yeah, you can pull it up.
All right, let's
works.
see here. Okay.
And I don't know, I would say if you know, if you have people like Tariq Bokhari coming out against it, I mean, you might want to, you know, think twice about it, right?
Yeah. Sometimes, you know, it's you know, who's against you kind of tells you where you're actually sitting on. You know, it's kind of like I'm lost, so where's the North Star? You know, where can I go? Who doesn't like me? You know, maybe that's.
I think the other thing too, before Ishmael starts, and he'll cover a lot of this, but I think you also have to ask yourself the question. Of course, you know, those individuals have, or one in particular, kind of referred to this as socialism, and that dumb people are buying into this plan. And that, of course, was an insult, and is an insult to communities across the city, that because we are buying into a comprehensive plan doesn't mean that people are dumb or stupid, or that people are subscribing to. And of course, we know these are all dog whistle words. We understand that. But I think the other thing you have to ask yourself, how many CBAs are done in their districts every time a rezoning takes place, right? And are those individuals dumb, stupid, inept, whatever the word is they choose to call people? But CBAs are negotiated between developers and the city. CBAs are negotiated within their districts all of the time. And so what we're saying now is make this a transparent process, make this an equitable process, because some communities are still fighting for the basics of just sidewalks. That's not equity, right? And then you have others that have numerous grocery stores coming out of the woodworks to put up, you know, stores across from each other, and others are still fighting for that. Sidewalks are a foregone conclusion. So I just said that just to preface it, as people are listening to or looking at the presentation, understand that this is not something new for Charlotte. CBAs are occurring every single day in certain communities as development is happening.
Right. And I want to say too that you'll hear from some council members and the members of the development community that CBAs are going to only drive up costs and drive development away from the community. I propose that it's just the reverse. CBAs won't necessarily drive up the cost. CBAs are a way of really streamlining and gaining community support for a project that would enhance, because then everybody knows exactly what is expected. So there's a, rather than a win-lose scenario, it's actually a win-win. And when you add the component of local government helping to support that and setting the framework in a framework like the UDO, then it is a win-win-win for everyone. And growth is not going to slow down, it's actually going to enhance. But then we are able to meet those equitable framework goals that are outlined in that vision, except set forth in the comprehensive plan. Let's win for the community, but let's win for the communities that have been most impacted and marginalized, and let's see growth all over the city.
So Ismail, should I move the slide?
Yeah, we can jump into. I think this presentation does a pretty good job of laying out some of the basics, and we do want to have time for people to ask questions too.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, basically, as we said before, a community benefit agreement is a contract between a community and a developer by which the community negotiates directly with the developer to decide on what particular benefits the community would see out of the project. And so, in that definition, what we kind of understand is that fundamentally, like, CBAs have to be community driven, right? We can't have, what we don't want is for either, the city with its particular, say, maybe like transit oriented goals or whatever else to kind of step in and say, well, we just sort of brought a company and we gave them public incentives to come, tax subsidies, whatever, and they're creating 700 jobs. This is a CBA. That's not what a CBA is, right? That's, you know what I mean? That's the standard public-private partnership model. So CBAs have to be as a direct result of communities organizing and communities putting forth what particular benefits they want to see. And typically it's with a developer, but if you look at examples throughout the country, oftentimes like CBAs can be for like, large scale, sometimes public-private projects, right? And they can also be directly negotiated with governments as well. Particularly like governments typically don't, directly say like build affordable housing or are not as involved in development as they were like, say, 40, 50 years ago. But a lot of these large scale projects do have some element of public support. So like we said, CBAs are effective when the community supports them. And, effectively like, there does have to be a kind of like cohesion and a kind of like understanding of what the community wants. And that's really when you get the best agreements, and that's when you get something that actually has like legal weight to it.
Yeah, and that's where you're right. I mean, I think that is, I think this second bullet that you have here, Ismail, I think is really important for the audience to understand is this is in a contract, because this is a community benefit is a contract. So it's legally enforceable. Meaning that just like if you breach a contract, you can take someone to court over it, right? You promised to pay me $1,000, you didn't pay me $1,000, I'm going to court, I'm going to sue you for $1,000 based on the contract. A CBA is a legally enforceable agreement because there's what they call consideration. And the consideration here is, that you can see right here, why would a developer bargain for this? Well, if a community coalition is large enough to either put their thumb in support of your project, or almost just as bad, if not worse, to actually take a negative position towards your project, particularly in front of the decision maker, i.e. the city council. And again, city council people are elected officials. They're going to be more sensitive to community-based, opposition or support. So I think if you're wondering why this is an important aspect, there's actual consideration, there's an actual contract here. There are two parties that are bargaining for something. There's an exchange. And so I think that's an important key there as well. You want me to move the slide, Ishmael?
Yeah, we can go to the next slide.
Hold on.
You can just do it so all the text, comes up. Right, and so, these are talking about some of the things that CBAs can include. A lot of it, of course, is, communities that are food deserts. So you're talking about grocery stores, right? Amenities, community space, right? either direct investment, affordable housing, all of these types of things. And in North Carolina, I think, I mean, like there's a conversation to be had about wage agreements. I mean, I definitely think that's something the community should absolutely push for. There would definitely be this is a side note. I don't want to get too much into it, but there probably will be pushback about legality, but that's like another conversation. But the point is that community benefit agreements can more or less like reflect what the particular needs and desires of the communities is, right? And what and I think there is, like when you look at Charlotte is like so spread out, and so the needs of, say, I can give you two examples, right? So one is going to be the sort of like the communities that are like in the far west, kind of like at the airport and beyond. And then you have the communities that are like in the far east, right? Like Fenco. And so those neighborhoods in the far west, right? Particularly, they had there was like an industrial development that they had concerns about how it was going to affect public space, the environmental aspects of it, and just basic questions about whether the developer had actually kind of done proper kind of environmental studies and all of this. And they did a petition and did everything. And for a lot of reasons, like the project went through anyway, right? So you have that part of Charlotte where people are concerned about industrial development, and where it is very clear that the sort of development policy around there is to build more kind of like, I don't know if I call it industrial, but it's not to prioritize things that people in the community want. Far East, they have a growing population and their roads are like not big enough, right, to sort of sustain the traffic that's coming as a result of the development. Right. And so what you have is kind of different communities that have different like needs, right, that have to be met. And because of the broad, I would say the broad economics of where things are now, and also specific to Charlotte, the fact that Charlotte has been a developer-driven city for so long, developers have a lot of power in actually kind of like, like shaping what the city looks like. So communities have to be able to pressure developers directly, and they have to be able to do so in a way that speaks to their specific needs. But there does, from our perspective, there does have to be a kind of, we have to stand as a united front, right? As communities that, are, that want a more equitable Charlotte, but also want to see a kind of development that actually it's for residents and people who live here, and is not just purely for the profit of a small number of people, many of which that don't live here. Right?
Yeah, because it sounds like, and maybe you can help clarify this. So when I'm looking at this this bullet here, obviously wage and hiring agreement as a community benefit, but maybe a grocery store, a food co-op. So a developer wants to build an area that is I don't know if the term is food desert anywhere or food insecure, I think they use, but basically no fresh food for X amount of miles. If a developer enters into a CBA to build in that area, one of the community benefits could be to develop a food co-op. So in many ways, it sounds like the community is having a say in, well, okay, fine, you're going to build a Target here, but you know what? You need to put some fresh food here for this neighborhood as well. Would that be kind of a correct assessment of what is possible with a CBA?
Right, that's definitely like one possibility, right?
Okay.
And CBAs will largely be effective to the extent that the community is organized, that the community is able to really create the public pressure and kind of navigate the process, and also to the extent that a community is able to negotiate a good agreement,
right?
It actually creates enforceability and has very clear terms.
So would it be accurate to say that the strength of the CBC, the more of the neighborhoods and sections of Charlotte that are part of this, it gives you more bargaining power?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
That is this single most impact of CBAs in the CBC coalition here in the Charlotte Mecklenburg landscape is the unity and the power of collective organization and bargaining around these issues. I just wanted to make a point too that CBAs are a way of also creating anti-displacement and anti-gentrification impacts with this, because that is one of the critical elements as Charlotte continues to grow. We see issues where land prices are going out of the wazoo. Tax values are ever increasing, and home values are increasing to the point that it is creating displacement. And so within this framework, from the CBC perspective, we want to also not only be able to negotiate CBAs, but we want to have significant anti-displacement, which also affects the NOAA properties that we have in our communities and allow us to have a greater bargaining strength. I'll just go one step further to give you a classic example. If you want to see the glaring inequity between communities, is all you have to do is just go from East Boulevard to West Boulevard as one glaring example of the inequities associated with the current land use and planning perspective. We've got a burgeoning blue line that is creating intense pressures and gentrification from South Boulevard to the west, really. And now we have the advent of and the development of the Silver Line, which is in close proximity as well. And if you follow the development patterns that have taken place, you know, these are just two examples of the type of displacement that has taken place. So when we look at it, where we have come from, some of these could have been mitigated if we had a policy like inclusionary zoning, but you had pushback from developer builders who would say that this is just socialized medicine, and you had the seeding of that type of sentiment from our elected official perspective. And now here we are with these problems, and this is the type of thing that we need to mitigate in order to move forward and to make this community more equitable. And as Ishmael said, we're not going to take this going forward. We're going to create a more equitable framework through the CBC.
Yeah, and you know, I think as well, Ricky kind of reminded me, I mean, you know, the city talked about an anti-displacement stakeholder commission. That was explicitly a demand that we put forward in our very first press release, right? Like, yeah. You know, like the city manager released a memo talking about the potential role the city could play, the role of public dollars. And the very fact that the city is like seriously thinking about CBAs right now, I mean, we're not totally where we want to be, but you know, this coalition has really gotten some very concrete, serious gains in this process. And it's very important to highlight that so that people understand the power of organizing and working in coalition together in unity. Because at the end of the day, you know, if we're kind of, if you have special interests that are opposed to a more equitable vision of Charlotte, you know, they're going to use their political access and their capital that they have acquired over a long period of time to really fight anything that really forces them to give up any of their power. Yeah. And so we have to use the power of collective action in our neighborhoods and such.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of that, you know, I think during the and I think it's in many respects the WBTV thing from last night. I was able to watch the section about the CBAs on the Roku, right? And you know, with Roku, they always kind of punch in a commercial. Well, I saw a commercial for something called "Let's Get It Right, Charlotte," and it was like a commercial where it looked like stock video footage of everybody who, you know, I guess works in some kind of office job, and then it would say, "Charlotte is doing a terrible thing with its comprehensive planning," and then they had these people frowning because, you know, somehow this type of development is just going to destroy the world. I think that when you talk about there are organized forces against CBAs, I think that you're absolutely correct. Because I mean, I just saw a commercial on TV kind of alluding, they didn't call CBAs out, but they were basically trying to shoot down the entire 2040 plan.
Right, and that's that speaks to the position that the special interest. We're talking about Rebic. I mean, the real estate and building industry coalition, but that's the position they've occupied, as to where they feel that tank an entire plan basically because they don't they don't like it, and specifically it bothers me the way in which they've targeted Black radio stations, because I personally I feel like their messaging really kind of they try to take things that people want and sort of like conflate them with other things that are not related. And then, make themselves seem like they care about community and affordable housing, and even the implication of racial justice, when really it's totally the opposite. I saw in the chat that somebody had asked for specific examples, and then there's like the next slide. A lot in the initial draft of the plan, right? There has been a lot of focus on Detroit was one example. It seems like the nearest example is Asheville. And Asheville has effectively like a public benefits table. I think the next slide has a little bit more detail about the process that Asheville has used. But there have been examples in like Atlanta and other cities where for large like projects that have involved like like stadium deals and other things like that, there have been CBAs negotiated as well. And I'll let Ricky and Dr. Sylvia kind of chime in on the Asheville example, because Asheville has more of like a kind of public benefits table, right? So, Asheville did, and the reason that Asheville is a relevant example is because it did, they did this as a part of their UDO, as a part of revamping and unifying their zoning ordinance. And they basically created a hotel district. And so, we had conversations actually with the head of, I think it was the city manager for Asheville. And basically the sort of underlying logic behind Asheville's model is that Asheville is a small town, but it's really famous for its restaurants and its breweries. And everybody who lives in Asheville absolutely is tired of the number of they don't want more hotels, right? And so this does really kind of speak to that. And then Asheville also had kind of like a reparations process. I mean, like a reparations fund that actually where the city did a lot of engagement in that. And so effectively what they did was they tied a public benefits table to a hotel overlay district that was a part of their UDO. And basically like the public benefits table lists specific conditions the developer has to meet based on a point system. And at least 50% of these points have to come from affordable housing or contribution to their reparations fund, right? And so they basically formed a design and review committee to kind of, that basically is responsible for overseeing that, this is actually something that hotels comply with. I think for us, I think we like the kind of implementation, but we want to ensure that what we really have is like a community benefits table, where the benefits are very much sort of, being put forth by communities here in Charlotte, right? And of course, we understand that, as part of the comprehensive plan, there is area planning for specific neighborhoods in different parts of the city. But we really want, I think we like the idea of a benefits table. We just need to ensure that, like the people are the ones that are driving what the benefits actually are.
So Ismail, maybe you can, correct me if I'm wrong. So opposition. So obviously on last night's episode, there was a snippet of Councilwoman Bakari, and he says CBAs are bad. I've heard them say CBAs are patently illegal, right? And that's why they're trying to say, city, get rid of this word community benefit agreement. It's patently illegal. Yet it looks like a city, Asheville, which is in the same state that Charlotte is in, has some version of a community benefits agreement, or at least a community benefits process. So what would you say to those who are, what would you say to those critics who continually say that community benefit agreements are just patently illegal?
So Rocky, let me just first say, I know Ricky and Ishmael have a lot to say about this, but the city attorney has already ruled that CBA is not illegal. So why a city council person or anybody else continues to say that? And let me also say that all developers are not a part of Rebic. Okay, so we're not trying to paint this broad brush of everybody feeling the same way, if it's Rebic or Councilman Bakari or Councilman Driggs or anyone else. The city attorney has already ruled that CBAs are not illegal. And if CBAs are so illegal, why are they being done in their districts? Okay, the only thing that they think might be illegal is the fact that we're now trying to make it transparent and available to every district, regardless of your zip code. right? Regardless of your economic status, regardless of your education, we're trying to make it absolutely available to everyone. There are some communities who know nothing about CBAs. I mean, the language we're using, community benefits agreements, UDO, Unified Development Ordinance, there are people who are just trying to make a daily living. They don't understand the stuff about area plans or about the comprehensive plan. They're not even looking at 2040. They're just simply trying to look at what we're going to do about tomorrow. But we understand that it is important for us to have attention, to pay attention to this matter, because it drives the city. It really does drive the city. And they are not illegal. I want to say that again and again. We're not talking about community engagement. You organize, you engage in order to come up with great community benefits agreements. So we're not favorable to changing the name to anything other than CBAs, community benefits agreements. Let's sit with it. Let's understand how it helps all communities, not just some communities.
So you said community engagement. So is there some kind of, I don't know, movement or something to try to water down even just the name of what you're trying to accomplish?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that's one of the newest things. As you all may know, those who have been following this whole Comp 2040 or 2040 comp plan, there's so many versions. And of course you have different individuals who want different things in and different things out. One is about zoning 2.1 and other is about, CBAs. Let's call it community engagement, so we don't have to call it, community benefits. No, you organize and you engage a community to derive at community benefits agreements. We all know what community engagement is. We're talking about a specific document, a contractual agreement, and they may say they're illegal, but of course we know they're not. The other thing too is what we've said to the city. You lead by example. And so here's your policy. Any city-owned land, any public land, when it is sold or when it is negotiated or transferred, there has to be a CBA attached to it. You can do that it's a deed restriction. Basically that's it. So you are capable of doing this if you're telling everyone else to do it, which we hope you are. But we're asking the city to start. And I think that's something that the planning director, Taiwo, has really been in favor of. And so that's what we're saying to the city. Let's start with the city, but let's not end there.
So let's go to this next slide, because I think it's...
If I can, let me just make a distinction between, I want to go back to this Asheville public benefits model just for a minute. And Ishmael is right, they have a public benefits table, but that, and while it kind of points the direction of CBA, it is not the same in the sense that the public benefits table was developed by the planning department in the city of Asheville around the hotel development, because that is a leading driver of the industry. One of the things that it lacks is an input from communities that are impacted. And so while it serves as a kind of a quasi community benefits, is actually a public benefits table. And the now residents and communities in that area are asking for full-blown community benefits agreements in terms of deciding how both a reparations fund and or the public benefits table will be allocated to communities. So I don't want us to confuse the point. What we're talking about is full participation from a benefits perspective, with community driving the discussion at the table and not a policy being developed and maintaining the status quo. As it relates to council persons who are staunchly against, all we say is just read the city manager's, the city attorney's memo. Because community benefits agreements are legal, and one of the things that we are not dumb, and we know that they are legal, and we're not going to allow for surgical wordsmithing to lessen the impact of CBAs in this landscape.
Well, this looks like a pretty interesting screen. I just kind of popped Ishmael and Ricky and Dr. Sylvia. So I have heard this term Rebic. I didn't really even know exactly what it stood for, but I guess it stands for Real Estate and Building Industry Coalition. So these are the folks that are these the folks who are behind those commercials I saw last night, or is that a different group?
Yeah, they mention it so in their ads, Get It Right, Charlotte. I actually heard their ad on Power 98.
Oh.
And so it's like
So they're really going into the community. They're like, you're going to live in this.
Yeah, I mean, they were saying like, oh, this is going to make it harder to build affordable housing. They're talking about impact fees and taxes, and it's just like, come on.
And let me say this: if those individuals were building affordable housing already, maybe we wouldn't be having this discussion. Okay, so for individuals who don't commit to engaging the community in equitable deals, if you will, they may have a problem with this. But for individuals who believe in fairness and who believe in equity, they understand that communities across this city deserve an opportunity to be at the table. Equity doesn't happen before access and inclusion. And if you're not giving the community access, you're not including them in the discussion, you can't jump to say, oh, now we're doing something equitable to you. That's more paternalistic. Like, we know what you need. And it's disingenuous for any entity to now come into our communities or other communities and act as if these things are not going to benefit them. And so what we're saying to the community, because we don't really, have to spend a lot of time talking to individuals who we know they're not going to buy into this because it's going to hurt their bottom line because they don't get to do what they want to do. This really does give communities and entities, nonprofit entities, a seat at the table. And that's what's important for us to do.
Yeah, because it sounds like, when we look again, going back to the history of land use decisions that have hurt and harmed, communities historically, there was never a seat at the table, right? I think that when, what was it, the Federal Loan Bank or whatever, back in the 40s, where they decided, well, we're going to redline these neighborhoods and say, these are neighborhoods you just can't give a housing loan in, period. That was wasn't necessarily a land use decision, but that was definitely a federal decision that had a real impact on communities. And of course, urban renewal, where they just took the wrecking balls and just knocked it. I mean, I don't think anybody asked, the people in Harlem, would you like them to just knock down, all your neighborhoods? They didn't say that to people in Brooklyn here I guess Brooklyn and New York and Brooklyn here in Charlotte. They didn't say that to them. Say, would you like a seat at the table while we take the wrecking balls and knock down your town hall that was in those neighborhoods? I mean, that's one thing I learned in that bus ride, is that when you go to First Ward and Third Ward and Fourth Ward, those are neighborhoods. These weren't where the convention center is. Those were African-American middle-class neighborhoods. Even the old timers here tell me, if you needed a contractor, you just drove into the ward and, found somebody who could do, high-skilled trades and things, It's all gone, because none of those folks are asked to come to the table to, explain like, well, we'd like to put a convention center here. Well, our church is here. There was never that kind of convo. So it sounds like what this coalition is trying to do is to try to rebalance land use decisions in a way that is, again, a real equity. Because if a developer wants to put up a convention center somewhere and the possibility of displacing the people who live there, there at least needs to be some give back. It just can't be 100%. Okay, these are my costs. Here's my pro forma. That there are casualties, there are collateral damages that happen whenever these things are done. And so, go ahead, Ishmael.
No, Rocky. Let me just say that there's already collateral damage that is being done, because now the very communities that we are talking about have been designated opportunity zones. And while that designation was a federal designation that came under the Trump administration, said to reinvest and revitalize communities, that just hasn't happened, and it has opened up our landscapes for development that the community cannot control. And you couple that with the designation of being a corridor of opportunity, we don't want a process by which these more powerful development groups have unrestricted and unregulated access that really leads to further erosion of our communities and gentrification and displacement. We want to sit at the table advocating for the needs of our communities on multiple perspectives, not just one perspective. It's not about just affordable housing, but it's about social and economic mobility and other frameworks going forward.
Right, and I think somebody had a good comment in the chat about rebalance, and I think that's really what this is.
Yeah.
And rebalancing, there has to be and understanding that this current landscape, these current conditions have really been stacked, not only against like the most marginalized communities and people, not just in terms of where people live, but in terms of where people work, in terms of, tenants, everybody else. But it's also just been stacked heavily against residents in general, right? I mean, like, when we look at the way in which Charlotte is kind of growing and developing, we look at, opportunity zones, right? I mean, there is a process that's making it just more difficult to live here. And what we find is that this process is heavily being subsidized by public dollars, right? Whether it's in terms of the incentives, whether it's in terms of the opportunity zones, which are effectively special economic zones where, developers pay even less taxes to build more stuff, right? And like the stuff that's being built, generates a lot of profit and doesn't really, do very much for the average person that lives and works in the city. You know what I mean? So it's we're seeking a kind of rebalance. I like the word, but from the perspective of those who have to give up their power, they absolutely are against it. They don't want balance. They want the system to work in a way where they get everything they want and they don't have to talk to anybody or negotiate with anybody or do anything different. And that just can't continue.
And some call it, definitely what Christina said about rebalance. Others call it restorative justice. Like, this is really something where communities are standing up and saying, we deserve attention also. Even when you look at the process itself, and how much attention is given to developers, even if you look at how many development projects get approved by the Charlotte City Council. I mean, it basically is what, over 95% of them are approved. And that's some great odds. So I'm on the developer side. And again, not all are doing this. There are some who truly believe in engaging communities and they want what's best for communities because they know that in some instances they may live there, but in other instances, they're going to have to answer to the community at some point in time. But then there are so many developers who go somewhere else to live and would not want some of these same things to be in their own communities because they're gated communities, so they're thinking, or covenant restricted communities. So it's never going to come and visit their door. But they're okay with doing it to others and then running away and doing some other things. I also would like to say that on yesterday, there was a great presentation that was headed up by Taiwo, who's the planning director, and it's called ETOD, which was Equity TOD, Transit Oriented Development in District. And it was great because he had representatives on. If you haven't had a chance to look at that, to know that there are cities who really are looking at equity TOD. That's the official ETOD. But there were representatives from Atlanta, Seattle, and then also a developer in the Charlotte area. It's something to look at, that people are being intentional about building in equity as they are doing development. So it's possible. It definitely is possible, but there has to be a will for it to take place. And also, as we're talking about a coalition of folk, a coalition of communities that say we absolutely will not accept anything less than.
So I'd love someone to kind of talk about this slide I just pulled up. I think this is either the last slide that was provided to me to put up here, but I think that this might be a great slide to kind of go into questions, but maybe you could have a chance to explain kind of what the goals of the CBC are in regards to the 2040 plan.
Right. I mean, and so, I mean, like we said earlier, the Charlotte Community Benefits Coalition is made up of 30+ neighborhoods and nonprofits, right? We put forth the demand that the city create an anti-displacement stakeholder group or commission, which they did, and to strengthen the language in the comprehensive plan around CBAs, which they also did. And I guess the stage that we're at now really is what the actual process for CBAs is going to look like. And whether or not, I think we're in a position right now where we're kind of being pushed, to talk about, well, what is this going to look like? How are we going to do this? And I think on some level, part of that is a smokescreen for opposition or co-optation of what we're doing. On another level, though, I mean, I do think that we have been the ones largely driving and pushing this process forward and putting forth various ideas about what this should look like, what language should be in the plan. I mean, even in terms of the legal memo that the city attorney did, I mean, we released our own memo prior to that. It wasn't released publicly. It was shared with planning staff and members of city council. And then, of course, a week later, the city attorney releases them, so it's, I mean, this is, I mean, like I said, I really want to emphasize that all of what is happening, this is happening as a result of people organizing and putting the work in. And a lot of times, you know, we feel overwhelmed, like we can't do anything, we can't make a difference. And like, that's really like, you know, like I think we can do, you don't really realize what you can do until you start to do it, right?
Yeah.
I think together we work together to educate one another, to support one another in this process, and really, you know, to really, you know, I think be like in solidarity and in community with one another. I mean, that's, we're talking about the, you know, the kind of policy and aspects, the legal aspects, but there's a very human aspect to this as well that we, you know, we also want to put forward in terms of the kind of society that we want to be in and the kind of place we want to live in. So that's the first thing. And the second thing really is looking at how community benefits zones will be integrated into the UDO, into the actual zoning regulations that are currently being created. Another thing was that the, you know, the UDO is being kind of done right now, and there's a committee, an ordinance advisory committee, that prior to us, the CBC existing, was almost entirely made up of developers and firms that represent developers and the building sort of industry here in Charlotte, with sort of some community representation, mostly in affluent neighborhoods. And so now there is more community representation on the committee that is overseeing the UDO. But we need to find, we're gonna be working on a way to kind of integrate CBAs into the UDO. We've been doing that all along. And so, yeah, I mean, we just invite people to join the CBC so we can continue. And I think another thing that we want to do, and I'll stop talking after this, is that, you know, we have a survey that we've developed where we're asking members of our coalition and in the community broadly, what kind of benefits would you like to see in your neighborhood, right? Like what kinds of things would you like to see in your community? And we want, it would be nice, right, like for the city to kind of also do this, and then for there to be like a public process that is on the record where you just ask, where we actually, like an actual democracy, we ask people what kinds of things do they want? What do you want Charlotte to actually look like? And so that's going to be a part of our process going forward too, as we, you know, are kind of developing, you know, policy proposals and demands and things of that nature. And I'll stop.
Yeah, and I want to add to that too, Ishmael, because I think that was important, because you talked about the democracy of it all, and to really say that this has been a long-term process. I mean, Charlotte started on this road in 2016, 2017. We started looking at UDO, the Unified Development Ordinance, and then when the current planning director, Taiwo, came in, he really talked about putting a vision, an overarching vision to all of this. And you've got a number of community people who have been engaged in this. There have been numerous listening sessions, a lot of engagement. I'm talking specifically about the 2040 comp plan. I'm not as much about UDO, but we started with UDO. So the comp plan is really the vision piece of it. And then the UDO will be put on top of that. And then the place types mapping. So it really is a three-tiered or a three kind of component process. But a lot of people have been engaged. So now that you've had people from the community, people from different, you know, organizations, nonprofits come in and say, or different sectors come in and say, here's what we want. Now you have a couple of, you know, council folk who are saying, no, throw it all out of the window. So it's not as if the city has not engaged the community. We're just saying to more specifically, let's talk about how we can put some more teeth into this plan. And that's exactly what CBAs do. CBAs give communities an opportunity to have a seat at the table and have teeth in the plan. So we don't want to leave you with the impression that the city has not been engaged in some level of community engagement. They really have. And if you look on the website where they talk about 2040 comp plan, you'll see all the types of engagement. You'll see the community ambassadors that have been going around the city trying to get people engaged. But again, if people are dealing with everyday life, they may not be looking at this, but it is important for some in the community to be looking at this and seeing how this is going to affect us now, once it's adopted, all the way up to 2040.
Right. And I
This,
want to.
I was gonna say this last slide is a little bit, the dates are, well, no, I think the adoption date is correct. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's actually correct. Yeah, okay, sorry, go ahead, Ricky.
No, go ahead, Ms. Ishmael. Go ahead.
Because we made this presentation before the release of the second draft. So I was just saying that, but I mean, I think these dates are more or less correct. I think that the final vote for the adoption of the comprehensive plan is the June 21st, if I'm not mistaken. And I think they released the second draft the same week of the 19th of this month. But that's all I was saying.
So
Yeah, it does say June 21st, so that's coming up.
yeah, so I see here, and in the chat, I think longtime friend of the show, A.W. Burgess, put in a request for himself and I guess his organization as well to join the CBC. So I think maybe this would be an opportunity, for some questions. I think we've definitely, we've got a lot of information here, but if there are any questions and comments, but definitely, how can folks who are on this audience, in the audience, or from other neighborhoods who may not be part of the 30, maybe you can grow it to 40 or 50, you know, organizations, you know, how would they get in touch?
So I put our email in the chat.
Okay.
You know, let me. I think, you know, reaching out that way. Also, I mean, I put my personal email in the chat too. I mean, people can reach out to me as well.
And for those who are listening, it's going to be CLT Community Benefits Coalition at gmail.com. So that's CLT Community Benefits with an S Coalition at gmail.com to reach out directly to the Charlotte CBC. And then Ishmael will also put his personal email in the.
And I'll also do a plug for HJC as well, the Housing Justice Coalition. We've been working with, and we're a member of the CBC, and we've been providing support. And we do. Our focus is housing policy, housing is a human right, all that. So yeah, I mean you can also join the Housing Justice Coalition. I'll put the email for that in the chat. Yeah, also.
Let me, I got one last comment I want to say, and that is this process need not be an us against them type of perspective. It's us for us. And this appeal is for communities and organizations that care about equity, that care about this new growth framework. When we first launched the CBC effort, it was placed as if though we were somehow against the comprehensive plan development and adoption. We're not anti-comprehensive plan. In fact, we support the goals, but we support too the inclusion of CBAs, not as an aspirational vision, but as a part of the effective tool within the UDO as it affects the whole, including the TOD. So from Crescent communities that are heavily impacted to Wedge communities that has pockets of impacted communities, we want to grow the Community Benefits Coalition to the point that support grows for a more equitable Charlotte. Mm-hmm. And so this appeal is to say to reach out. There's a saying that says, if we always do what we've always done, then we'll always get what we've always gotten. We can't continue to grow in a way in which there are divisions. If for Charlotte to grow and to continue to prosper and develop, then it's got to be under an equitable framework. And so whether you have been on the margin, you're sitting on the fence, come on over to the side of the Community Benefits Coalition and help us to achieve this more equitable framework within the 2040 comp plan.
So applications that are open for any organization that cares about what you care, neighborhoods throughout Charlotte, to join the CBC. Would that be correct?
Absolutely.
And so with that plug for our friends, the Charlotte Mecklenburg Public Library, I wish everybody a happy, healthy Memorial Day weekend. Be safe, and we'll catch you on the next thing. All right, take care, everybody. Bye.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.